Our bodies have an evolutionary story. As the descendants of flat-footed apes, we're not the quickest, but over millions of years we have developed a series of adaptations that make us excellent long-distance runners. The first step on this journey was bipedalism, but what caused us to branch away from our distant arboreal cousins to stand upright and walk on two legs? It's difficult to point to a single cause, but many anthropologists agree that shifts in climate, habitat, and diet all played roles. Around 100 million years ago, the Earth's climate cooled considerably. In the Great Rift Valley in East Africa, this cooling caused rainforests to shrink and woodland and mosaic habitats to expand. For the inhabitants of these forests, the great apes, this shift meant that ripe fruits, the mainstay of their diets, would have become less abundant, more dispersed, and more seasonal. They would have had to travel farther to get the same amount of food, and to resort more frequently to eating what are known as fallback foods. The fossil record and genetic evidence show how different species of great apes began going their separate ways in response to these long-term environmental changes. First, the gorilla lineage branched off, then the human chimpanzee lineage split several million years later. Not long after this divergence, we begin to see creatures with anatomical hints of habitual bipedalism. While swapping from four legs to two made these early hominins slower and at first less stable, over many generations they became gradually better at walking upright until eventually they were recognizably distinct from their ape ancestors. We are their descendants. Among other theories, bipedalism is thought to have evolved as an adaptation for carrying food, foraging upright, making and using tools, keeping cool, seeing over tall grasses, wading, and even displaying. But maybe most importantly, bipedalism was a way to save calories during terrestrial travel. You see, it all comes down to energy availability. Chimpanzees today can rely on fallback foods like fibrous stems and the leaves of plants, as well as various herbs, but the evidence suggests that the first hominins, particularly those living at the margins of shrinking woodland environments, would have needed to find and eat these foods more often and more intensively than chimps do. These foods would not have provided them with as much energy as the preferred fruits and soft plant parts of forest-living apes. The issue with having to walk long distances to get food is that it costs energy, particularly when you're an ape. So to fulfill a need to walk longer distances, natural selection favored anatomical changes that made terrestrial locomotion more efficient. If you watch a chimpanzee walk upright, you can see that it keeps its legs far apart and its upper body sways from side to side. In contrast, we Homo sapiens sway our torsos almost imperceptibly, which means our energy expenditure is mostly directed to moving forward instead of stabilizing the upper body. Our steadier gait is largely attributable to a simple change in the shape of the pelvis. As the figure shows, the large, broad bone that forms the upper part of the pelvis, the ilium, is tall and faces backward in apes. But this part of the hip is short and faces sideways in humans. This sideways orientation is a crucial adaptation for bipedalism because it allows the muscles on the side of the hips, the gluteus medius and gluteus minimus muscles, to stabilize the upper body over each leg during walking when only one leg is on the ground. Chimps cannot stand or walk this way because their hip faces backwards. This means that those gluteal muscles are not ideally placed to stabilize the trunk and upper limbs, while also propelling the body forward. So the chimp must spend energy and adapt within its own anatomical constraints. The only way a chimp can avoid falling sideways when one leg is on the ground is by tilting its trunk to the side above that leg. This sets off a chain reaction of muscle contractions to keep everything taut and stable, and those contractions cost energy. Another important adaptation for being a biped is an S-shaped spine. Like other quadrupeds, apes have spines that curve gently, so when they stand upright, their trunks naturally tilt forward. Their torso is positioned in front of their hips. This means they have to contract lots of muscles in their posterior chain, their extrinsic and intrinsic back musculature, and their gluteal muscles to stop themselves falling forward. In contrast, our spine has two pairs of curves, which center around a thoracic kyphosis and a lumbar lordosis. This brings our center of mass back over our bipedal base of support, so we can stand with much less effort. That's not all either. We also have expanded heel bones that increase the leverage of the muscles and tendons around our legs and feet. arches in our feet to store energy, a big toe that points forward, allowing us to push off, stabilized ankles, long legs for efficiency, buttressed knees to absorb force, inwardly angled thighs, expanded hip joints, shorter toes, and a downwardly oriented foramen magnum, the hole at the base of the skull where the spinal cord exits the cranial cavity, so there are no kinks in the spinal cord when we are standing upright. The consequence of all of these adaptations is a more efficient gait. Experiments conducted in the early 70s that involved getting chimpanzees to walk on a treadmill while wearing oxygen masks showed that walking was roughly twice as costly in chimpanzees as in humans and other mammals of similar size. A generation later, these results were confirmed in adult chimpanzees using more modern methods. Controlling for different body sizes, average humans spend the same amount of energy to walk a given distance as many quadrupeds, but chimpanzees and other primates spend significantly more. In the real world, chimps walk comparatively little, only about 2 or 3 kilometers a day, about 1 or 2 miles. For the same amount of energy, a human can walk between 8 and 12 kilometers, or between 5 and 7.5 miles. That is a massive saving for a species needing to travel to find food and fulfill daily energy demands. Because life is fundamentally about acquiring and using scarce energy to make more life, those apes who were better able to conserve energy would have had a reproductive advantage. This advantage shows in the fossil record. Until relatively recently, the world was teeming with different species of Homo who were all adept at walking. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo florensis, or hobbits, Homo luzonensis and Homo naledi are just some of the species of Homo that were walking the earth. Early hominins were walking about 6 million years ago, but they needed an additional 4 million years to acquire the full suite of capabilities for endurance running. The sequence for the genus Homo looks something like this. We were adept climbers first, and then became walkers who could climb pretty well. Then gradually we lost some of our arboreal abilities, but became walkers who could run when needed. About 2 million years ago, after another change in climate turned much of Africa into open woodlands and grassy savanna, our ancestors had to adjust their diets and start scavenging and hunting game. They became omnivores. Hominins probably first started to eat meat by scavenging, but by 2 million years ago, there is clear archaeological evidence that they also tracked and hunted large animals like wildebeests and kudu. In fact, tracking may have developed nearly 1.5 million years ago. Footprints from Kenya show how early hominins were moving along muddy lake margins where both trails and their makers could be watched and ambushed. But following prey is one thing, actually killing it is another. The act of putting stone points on spears was only invented around 500,000 years ago, and the bow and arrow was invented less than 100,000 years ago. So how did hominins overcome such large game as wildebeest? Simple, they used their endurance. Pursuit, persistence, or endurance hunting is strongly connected to tracking and involves chasing prey to exhaustion, after which killing is simple, and you don't need advanced weaponry to do it. There are several ways to persistence hunt. One is to take advantage of the distinctive human ability to avoid overheating while running. At the hottest time of the day, a group of hunters will chase an animal. The bigger, the better, because larger animals, like larger humans, overheat and tire faster. At first, the prey will inevitably gallop away faster than the hunters, who typically jog at a relaxed pace. Then, while the animal pants to cool down, the hunters relentlessly track it, often while walking, so they can chase their prey again before it is cooled. This process of chasing and tracking is repeated, and assuming the hunters resume the chase before the animal fully cools, its body temperature will gradually keep rising until eventually it reaches a state of heat stroke and collapses. A hunter can then walk right up to the animal and dispatch it safely without sophisticated weapons. According to records from hunts carried out by present-day hunter-gatherers in the Kalahari, the average distance travelled during these endurance hunts is slightly longer than a half marathon, and the hunters walk about half the time and run at a 10-minute per mile pace, or about 6 minutes and 13 seconds per kilometre for the rest. Importantly, the most challenging aspect of these hunts is not the running, but the ability to track using clues such as footprints, traces of blood, and knowledge of the animal's likely behaviour. An ability to run was obviously vital for us to be able to persistence hunt, and the ability to run the serious dogged long distance kind is the thing that separates us from all those other species of Homo I mentioned before. Taking the Neanderthals as an example, they were probably more efficient walkers than us due to their wider hips, their massively muscled thighs, their slightly curved leg bones, and reinforced foot arches. These adaptations were needed to cope with their greater bulk, but while the Neanderthals were physically powerful and capable hunters, their cold-adapted stocky proportions likely made sustained long-distance running less efficient than in Homo sapiens. The most recent fossil and genetic evidence suggests that we, Homo sapiens, evolved from an anatomically diverse meta-population connected across many regions of the African continent between 800 and 600,000 years ago. The oldest Homo sapiens skulls, pretty much like extant humans today, date to around 200 to 150,000 years ago in East Africa. So what anatomical adaptations have enabled us to be so good at endurance running? First, our legs are relatively long for an animal of our size, something that becomes obvious when standing next to a chimpanzee. That increases the length of our stride. Human legs also have lengthy elastic tendons like the Achilles. According to one estimate, the Achilles tendon and the spring in the arch of the human foot, known as the plantar fascia, together return about half the mechanical energy of the body hitting the ground. Longer tendons like the Achilles aren't necessary for walking, but they function as springs during running. Every time your legs and feet land on the ground during a run, these tendons stretch as your hips, knees, and ankles flex, and the arch in your foot flattens. When the tendons recoil, the energy they store is returned to help propel you back into the air. All animals adapted for running, from greyhounds to deer, have legs with long, springy tendons, but these tendons are short in our close relatives like the chimpanzee. That means humans independently evolved long tendons like the Achilles to help us run. And because we are unsteady bipeds that evolved from tree-climbing apes, it makes sense that humans evolved a suite of features for stabilization. For example, our enlarged gluteus maximus, the largest muscle in the human body, is fairly inactive during walking, but during running, it activates forcefully with every step, preventing the trunk from falling forward following each landing. We can also rotate our trunks as we pump our arms in a kind of counter-synchrony with our legs, which helps to conserve energy. And then we have the nuchal ligament at the base of the skull, which helps keep our heads steady as we run. Our semicircular canals, the balance organs in the inner ear, are also enlarged compared to apes and help stabilize the head during rapid movement. When it comes to our cardiovascular system, at rest the heart pumps about 4 to 6 litres of blood each minute, but during running it can pump as much as 5 times more to supply hard-working muscles and cool the body. A typical runner's heart pumps 20 to 24 litres a minute, and an elite runner can reach an impressive 35 litres a minute. We can do this because we have evolved voluminous and elastic heart chambers that differ markedly from the smaller, thicker, stiffer hearts of apes. We also have an increased blood supply to the brain to help cool this vital organ during exercise. Our leg muscles usually have 50 to 70% fatigue-resistant, slow twitch fibers, far more than chimpanzees, which range from 11 to 32%. Beyond our legs, glutes, rotating torso, stable heads, and industrious hearts, the most vital and unique adaptation that enables humans to run for long periods, though, is our ability to sweat. Running generates a lot of body heat, and this can be dangerous in high heat and humidity. Like all mammals, we cool using evaporation. When heat turns water into steam, the energy lost chills the skin underneath. Most animals take advantage of this natural refrigeration by panting, taking short, shallow breaths to evaporate saliva in their throats and on their tongues. As the water evaporates and cools the skin, blood in the veins just beneath is also cooled. This chilled blood then cools the rest of the body. But panting is constrained by 2 things. First, tongues, mouths, and noses only provide a small surface area for cooling. Second, when dogs and many other quadrupeds gallop, they lose the ability to pant because galloping is a seesaw type of gait that slams the guts into the diaphragm with every stride. When a quadrupedal animal shifts from a trot to a gallop, it must stop panting and synchronize each breath with each stride, so it can't effectively cool itself at high speeds. In contrast, humans evolved a highly effective cooling system through the use of millions of eccrine sweat glands distributed across almost the entire body surface. Sweating effectively turns the whole body into a large evaporative surface. We also lost most of our fur, which helps air move along the skin surface, without any barrier, enabling rapid heat dissipation. Of all our unique traits, no animal sweats quite as effectively as we do in terms of sustained evaporative cooling during running. When running in the heat, humans can sweat 1 litre per hour, sometimes even more, enough to keep cool while racing a marathon in 32 degrees Celsius, conditions in which most mammals would overheat quickly. Almost all of the features I just reviewed that help humans run are what biologists term convergent, which means they evolved independently in humans and in other animals adapted for running. They're not necessary for walking. You see, running is not just a faster form of locomotion than walking. It is mechanically very different. And those mechanics, or more specifically those biomechanics, are what we'll discuss in the next part.